The first time Emily Carter understood what real pain felt like was the night the phone rang at 2:17 a.m. The house in Cedar Falls, Oregon, was quiet except for the ticking clock in the kitchen and the soft hum of the refrigerator. She had been half asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled to her chin, waiting for a call that every military family dreads. When she picked up the phone, she already knew. The voice on the other end was gentle, trained to be calm, trained to break hearts without breaking protocol. By the time the call ended, Emily's hands were shaking so badly that the phone slipped from her grip and hit the floor. Her husband, Daniel Carter, was not coming home. In the weeks that followed, the world moved forward as if nothing had happened. Cars drove by, children laughed at the park across the street, the sun rose and set with cruel consistency. Emily felt frozen in place. She went through the motions, funeral arrangements, thank you notes, accepting casseroles from neighbors whose eyes were full of pity. Everyone told her she was strong. She nodded and smiled, but inside she felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out everything that made her human and left only a shell behind. Daniel's absence was loud. His coffee mug still sat in the sink. His jacket still hung by the door. At night, Emily reached for him in her sleep and woke up with tears soaking her pillow. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, it was the guilt. Guilt for being alive when he wasn't. Guilt for moments when she almost forgot and then remembered all over again. Guilt for feeling angry at a man who had died believing he was doing the right thing. One afternoon, unable to breathe in the house any longer, Emily drove aimlessly until she found herself at the small community center downtown. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Volunteers needed, community outreach." She didn't know why she went in. Maybe she just needed to be somewhere that wasn't filled with memories. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and old books. A woman with kind eyes handed Emily a form and asked if she had any special skills. Emily almost laughed. She wrote, "I can listen." That was how she met Lucas Reed. Lucas volunteered at the center 3 afternoons a week, helping organize food drives and tutoring kids who struggled with reading. He was quiet, with a soft-spoken voice and eyes that seemed to notice things other people missed. The first time they spoke, it was about something trivial, where to stack donated boxes, but Emily felt something shift inside her. Lucas didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like she was just another human being, broken maybe, but still whole enough to matter. They didn't become close right away. Weeks passed with small conversations and shared silences. Lucas never pushed her to talk, and Emily appreciated that more than he knew. When she finally did open up, it wasn't planned. One evening, after a long day of sorting donations, she found herself sitting on the steps outside the center with Lucas, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. She mentioned Daniel's name, and once it was out, the words kept coming. She told him about the phone call, the empty bed, the guilt. She cried harder than she had since the funeral. Lucas didn't interrupt. He didn't offer cliches or try to fix her pain. He just listened. When she finished, he handed her a tissue and said quietly, "I'm really sorry. You didn't deserve that kind of loss." For the first time since Daniel's death, Emily felt understood. What Emily didn't know then was that Lucas carried his own scars. Years earlier, a drunk driver had taken his younger sister, leaving Lucas with a permanent knot of anger and regret. He had volunteered at the community center as a way to make sense of his own pain, to turn something ugly into something useful. Seeing Emily struggle awakened something in him, a desire not to save her, but to walk beside her. As the seasons changed, so did Emily. She laughed occasionally, surprised by the sound of it. She started sleeping through the night again. Lucas became a steady presence, someone she could rely on without feeling like a burden. Still, she kept her heart guarded. Loving again felt like a betrayal, and the fear of losing someone else was paralyzing. Then, just as Emily began to feel a fragile sense of peace, life tested her again. The house she shared with Daniel, filled with memories both beautiful and painful, fell into foreclosure. Medical bills and funeral expenses had drained her savings. The day she received the final notice, she sat on the floor and stared at the walls, overwhelmed by the thought of losing the last place that connected her to her old life. She didn't tell Lucas at first. She didn't want to be pitied again. But when he noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the forced smiles, he gently asked what was wrong. This time, Emily hesitated longer before answering. When she finally told him, her voice cracked. Lucas listened, just as he always had. Then he did something unexpected. He stood up, offered her his hand, and said, "You don't have to face this alone." Emily took his hand, not knowing where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of hope flicker in the darkness. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Emily had ever faced, but they were also the most transformative. With Lucas's help, she found a small apartment near the community center. It wasn't much, thin walls, creaky floors, a view of the parking lot, but it was hers. On the first night there, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Emily felt the weight of her past pressing down on her chest. She sat on the floor and cried, mourning not just the house, but the life she thought she would have. Lucas arrived with 2 paper cups of takeout coffee and a bag of groceries. He didn't comment on the mess or the tears. He simply sat beside her and said, "New beginnings don't always feel good at first." They ate in silence, the kind that feels safe rather than awkward. That night, after Lucas left, Emily slept more peacefully than she had in months. As winter gave way to spring, Emily slowly began to rebuild. She found a part-time job at the local library, surrounded by books that offered escape and understanding. She continued volunteering, now helping others who carried their own invisible burdens. Pain, she realized, connected people in ways joy sometimes couldn't. When a young woman at the center broke down after losing her job, Emily was the one who sat beside her and listened, offering the same quiet kindness Lucas had once given her. The relationship between Emily and Lucas deepened, though neither of them rushed to define it. There were moments when Emily caught Lucas looking at her with something more than friendship in his eyes, and moments when her heart raced just being near him. Still, fear lingered. Loving Lucas meant risking loss again, and Emily wasn't sure she was strong enough to survive that kind of pain twice. The turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Lucas didn't show up at the community center. He didn't answer his phone. Hours passed, and Emily felt a familiar panic rise in her chest. Old memories flooded back, and she hated herself for how quickly fear took over. When Lucas finally called that evening, his voice was strained. He told her he'd been in a minor car accident. He was okay, but shaken. Emily drove to his apartment without thinking. When she saw him standing there, alive and apologetic, something inside her broke open. She realized that avoiding love didn't protect her from pain, it only kept her from healing fully. Standing in that doorway, she saw clearly that love wasn't a weakness, it was an act of courage. Lucas confessed then about his sister, about the anger and guilt he still carried. He admitted that helping others had been his way of surviving. Emily listened, holding his hands, understanding that they were more alike than she had ever known. 2 broken people, trying to build something whole. Their love didn't erase the past. Emily still missed Daniel. Lucas still mourned his sister. But together, they learned that grief and love could coexist. Some nights were still heavy, filled with memories and tears. Other nights were light, filled with laughter and shared dreams. They didn't promise each other a life without pain. They promised honesty, patience, and kindness. Years later, Emily stood in front of a room full of volunteers at the community center, now as its director. She spoke about resilience, about the power of listening, about turning pain into purpose. Lucas watched from the back of the room, pride shining in his eyes. When their gazes met, Emily smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had learned that triumph didn't mean forgetting the pain. It meant carrying it with grace and allowing it to shape you into someone more compassionate. Love hadn't saved her from suffering, but it had given her the strength to endure it and the courage to hope again. As Emily walked toward Lucas, hand in hand, she understood something simple and profound. Life would always be uncertain. Loss would always be a possibility. But kindness, given freely, received bravely, had the power to turn even the deepest sorrow into a path toward hope.